It's another windy day in Hawaii. But damn, look at that view. Look at that view. Look at that beautiful mountain, that cloud, the bird that just flew by. It's nice out here. Sometimes it's nice to be at a court with no wind guards because you can enjoy the view from the fence. This fence has been here for a while, huh? Look at that rust. These courts look okay. They look all right. We have chickens out here in Hawaii. I guess that's a thing. Hello. And we got a Falco main over there getting his tennis gear on. I should get my tennis gear on too. Yeah, look at this view, guys. So nice. Thank you. Got my barefoot shoes on. You can find these on my Amazon storefront. I'm all about the barefoot shoes. So good for your feet. And they're only like $30, $40. Can't recommend them enough. And if you're gonna get these kinds of shoes, I recommend these kinds of socks as well. So both can be found on my Amazon storefront. In today's video, I'm going to break down the differences between the Pure Aero VS and the Pure Aero 98. Now, I don't think there's actually too many meaningful differences between the two rackets. They're definitely more similar than not, but the main differences, I'll break those down and I'll get into why I think they are. All in all, doesn't need to be too long or too detailed of a video. Let's get some hitting footage of both rackets. Also, it's just hard to get the Pure Aero VS right now, so even if I did have a slight preference for it, probably just try to switch over to the 98 because it's so much easier to get. So for anyone, if that's a factor, I understand. But I think the reality is that I actually prefer the 98 despite having done the custom paint job on the VS. But I got the VS used for a very good deal, and I figured it's similar enough to just make an experiment racket. But get to know it enough to break down what the differences are, because I was curious. Did I mention how humid it gets in Hawaii? You guys probably know that. All right, and we got a tripod this time. I just realized I think we're on those padded hard courts. So as I said, I'm hitting with the Pure Aero VS here, custom paint job. Swing weight is actually about 317, a little bit lighter than I might expect being happy with, but like I said also, I've had this racket up at many different swing weights before, including all the way up to like 330. So when I redid my paint job, I ended up taking some of the lead out because I thought 330 was a little excessive. But even at 330, that tinny quality was still present. And it might have helped, but I do think that there's just something about the racket that doesn't feel quite as buttery or quite as plush as the Pure Aero 98. Can't quite put my finger on what it is, but I do have a theory. So there's probably some little differences in the layup between the two rackets, but I do think one thing that could make a difference that you can see is in the grommets. The grommets on the Pure Aero VS have an enlarged oval shape to give the strings more space for lateral movement, and the Pure Aero 98 does not. In fact, the grommets actually hug the strings pretty tight. So it's possible that the strings, especially in the mains on the Pure Aero VS, are just not as securely mounted to the racket. And I would actually imagine that would translate to a more hollow feeling, a little more tinny of a feeling, if you will. So it could just be that. Whatever the case, after enough back and forth time, I have decided that the Pure Aero 98 just feels a little better. But the VS is actually so similar that you can, for the most part, switch out one for the other and play the same kind of tennis. But at least in my hands, with my racket exactly, I would be able to tell the difference with which one I'm hitting immediately.
Sorry, I meant to go a little deeper.
Which is good for me. I prefer the racket that is actually easier to get, so that's nice. It was a real hassle finding a VS. I felt like all the options available on eBay were overpriced and not in the best condition. All right, brief intermission here, but I wanted to ask our fellow Falco main, Charlie, about his racket a little bit. So, fellow Spacey main, could you tell me a little bit about your racket? Because ever since I've known you, and I've known you for like maybe 7-ish years now, how did you get that racket? Because ever since I've known you, it's always been that one. And then you have a Babolat Aero Pro or something of the same generation,
Yeah,
I think.
right. I had that. So I got this one in high school actually, 10 plus years ago, and my mom, who's a fan of Nadal, she just chose the Babolat one. I think she chose this one, and then the Aero Pro, yellow and black one. I don't know, I just felt more solid hitting with this one all the time. I gravitated towards this one, and I bought a few more, and now this is just what I've been using for years.
How many of those do you have? I know you have one that looks more beat up than that one, right?
Yeah, this is probably the better looking one.
And you just have 2 total?
3.
You have 3 total, okay.
Yeah, but it's not like, I just bought them kind of used.
Okay.
Kind of a cheap person when it comes to tennis equipment.
Well, it's cool. I mean, those are perfectly good rackets, and I think it suits your play style well. And you don't seem to obsess about this and that detail too much. Like you've been happy with that racket for that long. I would have wanted to try so many things in that meantime. I'd be in the rabbit hole, so to speak.
I wanted to like try some rackets, but for me it was just too much. It was way more trouble than it was worth just to like stick with these rackets, get used to them, and I can play pretty solid with these.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, you know what? Now that you're acquainted with a racket, there's a lot of things about your tennis that are probably designed or shaped by the racket that you've had for so long. You might go into a demo process with a pretty strong preference for what you want, and you'll find some rackets give you that and some really don't.
Yeah.
And I wonder what you'll settle on.
I feel like I would just end up wanting something similar to this just because I'm used to it now.
Yeah.
The specs are kind of average. It works for me.
Well, that'd be cool to see you. I'll get you in on a demo sometime just to pick your brain a little bit about what you're going through. I think it's cool to see what a demo process would be like for a guy that's just stuck with the same thing for that long, didn't overthink it too much, and then for the first time like might really try to pick a racket for themselves and find something that works. That'd be interesting.
I feel like it would just take a long time for me to get to the point where I feel comfortable with the demo racket. And then there's the question of using the right strings and having the tension, and there's a lot of factors that you're playing with.
Yeah.
So it'd be hard for me to like isolate it. It'd take a long time.
Yeah. Well, if that's the racket you want something similar to, I think that narrows it down quite a lot. Maybe there'd be like 5 that are worth trying, unless you wanted to try something really different. Then there'd be all kinds of things. All right, well, let's hit a little more. I think we're hitting better than we did yesterday.
Yeah.
So that's cool. All right, back on court here. Thanks for checking out Charlie's history with that pure drive. And for all you melee heads out there, I'll tell you a real quick story about how me and Charlie got connected. We both played tennis at a place you've seen in a lot of my footage, and we became pretty quick friends on the tennis court, but also found out that we both were into a technically illegal version of Smash Bros, known as Project M at the time. I'm hoping somebody listening to this is like, oh, you guys know Project M? Project M ultimately led to us playing Melee. It was kind of a gateway into Melee. And a lot of you guys have been telling me you're Marth mains. Charlie used to be a Marth main, but now he's a Falco main in Melee. And I never really had a main, but I went from playing Sheik in Project M to that translating well into Melee. So that was my gateway into Melee,
angles and rackets.
playing Sheik. All right, now back to tennis. But in one of my future videos, I plan to draw some parallels between the two games because the Melee community really appreciates the tennis community. And I think the tennis community would actually appreciate knowing that. And in my opinion, tennis and Melee, as far as a video game and a real world game goes, could not be more similar. It's crazy. But again, I'll talk about that in a future video sometime. So at this point in the video, I switched from the VS to the 98 for a little compare and contrast. I immediately noticed how much more buttery and soft it felt despite having all of the other qualities that I liked with how it played. Yes, the swing weight is slightly higher, a few points, maybe like 5 to 7 points higher. But in terms of comfort on contact, it feels kind of like a different racket. Way more comfortable. I was never able to do anything to the Pure Aero VS to get the kind of comfort I just effortlessly get on a Pure Aero 98. So that was something I noticed immediately. The difference in swing weight I more so noticed on things like plow through and stability. But again, 7 units isn't a huge difference. I'm playing actually with a prototype string that I can't really say very much about, but that's what it is for anyone wondering. I'm pretty much allowed to say that much. But it's not that Toroline Enso string that I am hitting with in the pure Aero VS, which I actually talk a little bit more about later in the video. Some of this footage I'm just going to keep in here because I am on a vacation in Hawaii. Naturally, I'm playing tennis wherever I go because I am madly addicted to this game. So I may or may not have something to say at every moment, but that's fine. We can just enjoy the silence together and appreciate the tennis and the scenery. I appreciate these courts because they weren't the most expensive looking courts, but they felt very organic to the area I was in Hawaii. And the scenery is just so crazy.
All right, back to the VS now. When I went to the 98, it definitely felt a little softer on contact. Swing weight's a little higher, but like I said, I've had this with lead on it at a higher swing weight, and it's always felt a little more tinny than the 98s did. So we'll go back. Maybe there'll be enough contrast going back and I'll really feel it.
I think mixing up these angles is a good idea. Watching myself play is good. I realize having engaged footwork helps the footage feel like it moves better, but it does translate into better tennis. I've also realized for my backhand side, it's a side of my tennis that I have to be more conscious of. It just takes more effort in every way. I got to watch the ball more carefully, make sure my feet fall into position more carefully. I think it's a tougher shot, but I'm also just less developed on that side. All in all, I felt pretty decent about my tennis, though, in this video. Towards the end of my hit, and I mentioned this later in the video, but Enso doesn't have the most amazing snapback. It's actually really good. I want to make that clear, but I say later in the video, it's like an 8 out of 10. I actually downgrade my rating from 9 out of 10 to 8 out of 10 after hitting with it here.
All right, we had to migrate north due to some lessons, but all good. We're just gonna pick up where we left off.
Because I can tell it's aging in a way that just doesn't maintain the snapback quite as well, but it is still way better than strings like Torbite and Hyper-G. And it does pocket the ball quite nicely, so it's definitely got a lot of favorable characteristics, and I think it will last longer than quite a few polyester strings out there. But it will get outlasted by things like Toroline's Wasabi, Wasabi X, or Restring Zero. So I don't think I would be switching to this string, but there are some people that might prefer it to my favorite strings. And if you want to try it, of course, there's my discount code that you can use at Toroline's website or Restring's website. But my personal recommendation is Toroline Wasabi, Wasabi X, or Restring Zero. And I did a video breaking down those strings. I really like Wasabi X in the crosses with either Restring Zero or Toroline Wasabi in the mains. I think either of those combinations might be my favorite string bed setup.
All right, I'm gonna keep hitting, but I'm done filming because I'm getting mad at my tennis. The humidity just has a way of persisting here, so I just feel like I can never get my hands dry. I have some of that Turna, what is it? Some kind of powder I can put on my hands, and I left that in the car, but I'm gonna keep that with me on court here because the humidity is no joke. Yeah, I got 2 of these towels and they just aren't cutting it. Anyway, it's partly that, feeling a little tight, and the backhands are doing what backhands do sometimes. But I have an update on this Enso string. The snapback is still really good, but I said in my last video it's like a 9 out of 10. I'm gonna say maybe 8 out of 10. So definitely not on the level of Wasabi or Restring Zero. You see these don't quite snap back into place. It's actually a little bit better than some strings would be at this age of the string, but it's not on that level of Toroline's Wasabi or Wasabi X or Restring Zero. So snapback's maybe an 8 out of 10. Yeah, see I got Toroline and Wasabi X here, and the mains are just snapping right back into place. Big difference. Cool string, I guess. It pockets the ball really well, but I don't know if I'd switch to it just because it's not really the balance of pros and cons that I want. But it looks really cool in this racket.